Nuclear War Survival Skills, Chapter 7 Protection Against Fires and Carbon Monoxide continued, page 70. Causes of fire. Figure 7.4 pictures the same house shown in Figure 7.1. After it had been struck by the blast effects of a small nuclear test explosion at the 5 psi overpressure range. If the house had been hit by the blast effects of a multi-megaton weapon with longer-lasting blast winds, it would have been wrecked and about as completely at the 3 psi overpressure range. At the 3 psi overpressure range, the blast winds from an explosion 1,000 times as powerful as the Nevada test explosion that wrecked this house would blow 10 times as long. This longer duration, 100 mile per hour blast wind would increase the damage done by the blast wave. The 3 psi overpressure range from a 20 megaton surface burst is about 10 miles from the center of the crater, and from a 1 megaton surface burst, about 4 miles. If the blast wrecked house shown in the illustration had a furnace in operation when it was demolished, the chances of its being set on fire would have been high. In Hiroshima, many of the first fires resulted from secondary effects of blast, especially the overturning of stoves, and not from heat radiation. Although the airburst produced no fallout, firefighters from undamaged nearby communities were unable to reach most of the burning areas because of blast debris blocking the roads. Later, they were kept from burning areas by intense heat. Some water mains were broken, which made water unavailable for firefighting in certain areas. In the event of an attack on the United States employing many surface bursts, fallout would prevent firefighting for days to weeks in a large part of the most populated regions. The basements of many substantial buildings will withstand 5 psi blast effects and can prevent occupants from suffering serious injuries from blast. Most home basements can be reinforced with stout boards and posts so as to give good protection against blast effects up to considerably higher than 5 psi. But considering the dangers of fires in probable blast areas, it is safer to build an earth-covered shelter well removed from buildings than it is to seek protection in shelters inside buildings. Carbon monoxide and toxic smoke. If an undamaged building is burning, people inside may be killed by carbon monoxide, toxic smoke, or fiery hot air. Tests have shown that even fast burning, rubble free fires produce very high concentrations of carbon monoxide. If large scale fires are burning near a shelter, where the fuck was I? The dangers from both carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide may continue for as long as 1.5 hours after ignition. Therefore, the ventilation pipes or openings of a shelter should not be placed close to a building that might be expected to burn. In the smoldering rubble of a large test fire, after 24 hours, the carbon monoxide concentration was still more than 1%, and the air temperature was. Figure 7.4. Unburned wreckage of the same two-story wood frame house pictured in Figure 7.1 after being wrecked by the 5 psi blast effects of a small nuclear test explosion. Pretty much nothing left. Page 71. 1,900 degrees Fahrenheit. A carbon monoxide concentration of only 0.08%, which means 8 parts carbon monoxide in 10,000 parts of air, will cause headaches, dizziness, and nausea in 45 minutes and total collapse in 2 hours. Realization of carbon monoxide dangers to persons in simple fallout shelters and basements may have led the writers of Soviet civil defense publications to define the zone of total destruction as the blast areas where the overpressure exceeds 7 psi and residential and industrial buildings are completely destroyed. The rubble is scattered and covers the burning structures, and as a result, the rubble only smolders and fires as such do not occur. Smoldering fires produce more carbon monoxide than do fiercely burning fires. Whether or not the occupants of basement shelters survived the direct blast effects is of little practical importance in those blast areas where the rubble overhead burns or smolders. So in the zone of complete destruction, Russian rescue brigades plan to concentrate on saving persons trapped inside excellent blast shelters by the rubble. About 135,000 Germans lost their lives in the tragic city of Dresden during 3 days of firebomb raids. Most casualties were caused by the inhalation of hot gases and by carbon monoxide and smoke. Poisoning. Germans learned that when these dangers were threatening an air raid shelter, the occupants' best chance of survival was to run outside, even if the bombs were still falling. But in a nuclear war, the fallout dose rate may be so high that the occupants of a shelter threatened by smoke and carbon monoxide might suffer a more certain and worse death by going outside. Instead, if they know from instrument readings and their calculations that they probably would receive a fatal dose before they could reach another shelter, the occupants should close all openings as tightly as possible. With luck, carbon monoxide in deadly concentrations would not reach them, nor would they be overcome by heat or their own respiratory carbon dioxide before the fire dangers ended. Dr. A. Broido, a leading experimenter with fires and their associated dangers, reached this conclusion. If I were building a fallout shelter, I would spend a few extra dollars to build it in my backyard rather than in my basement, locating the intake vent as far as possible from any combustible material. In such a shelter, I would expect to survive anything except the close-in blast effects. This advice also applies to expedient shelters built during a crisis. Page 72, Chapter 8, Water. Water and salt requirements. Painful thirst has been experienced by very few Americans. We take for granted that we will always have enough water to drink. Most of us think of food and water in that order. When we think of survival essentials that should be stored, but if unprepared citizens were confined in a shelter by heavy fallout, they soon would realize that they should have given first priority to storing adequate water. For the kidneys to eliminate waste products effectively, the average person needs to drink enough water so that he pisses at least 1 pint each day. When water is not limited, most people drink enough to piss 2 pints. Additional water is lost in perspiration, exhaled breath, and shit. Under cool conditions, a person could survive for weeks on 3 pints of water a day. If he eats but little food, and if that food is low in protein, cool conditions, however, would be the exception in crowded below-ground shelters occupied for many days. Under such circumstances, 4 or 5 quarts of drinking water per day are essential in very hot weather, with none allowed for washing. For a 2-week shelter stay, 15 gallons per person should be stored in or close to a shelter. This amount usually would provide for some water remaining after 2 weeks to prevent thirst in case fallout dangers were to continue. In a 1962 Navy shelter occupancy test lasting 2 weeks, 99 sailors each consumed an average of 2.4 quarts which means 2.3 liters of water per day. The test was conducted in August near Washington, D.C. The weather was unseasonably cool. The shelter was not air conditioned except during the last 2 days of the test. When one is sweating heavily and not eating salty food, salt deficiency symptoms, especially cramping, are likely to develop within a few days. To prevent this, 6 or 8 grams of salt, about 1/4 an ounce or a half a tablespoon, should be consumed daily in food and drink. If little or no food is eaten, this small daily salt ration should be added to drinking water. Under hot conditions, a little salt makes water taste better. Carrying water. Most families have only a few large containers that could be used for carrying water to a shelter and storing it in adequate amounts for several weeks. Polyethylene trash bags make practical, expedient water containers when used as waterproof liners inside smaller fabric bags or pillowcases. Plastic bags labeled as being treated with insecticides or odor controlling chemicals should not be used. Figure 8.1 shows a teenage boy carrying over 10 gallons, which means more than 80 pounds of water. Well balanced front and back for effective packing. Each of his 2 burlap bags is lined with 2 20-gallon polyethylene trash bags, one inside the other. To avoid possible pinhole leakage, it is best to put one waterproof bag inside another. To close a plastic bag of water so that hardly any will leak out, first spread the top of the bag until the 2 inner sides of the opening are together. Then fold in the center so that the folded opening is 4 thickness and smooth. See figure 8.2. I think something was missing right behind that 4. Continue smoothly folding in the middle until the whole folded up opening is only about 1.5 inches wide. Then fold the top of the bag over on itself so the folded up opening points down. With a strip of cloth or a soft cord, bind and tick the folded over part with a bow knot as illustrated. Page 73. Figure 8.1. Carrying 80 pounds of water in 2 burlap bags, each lined with 2 larger plastic trash bags, one inside the other. As you can see in that little picture is the diagram of what he was talking about. You have the 2 bags. You have the water in the ball on both sides, almost like a yin and a yang. And then you tie them in between and thus can carry it over your shoulder. Figure 8.2 is the way you do it. How folding and tying the mouth of a water-filled plastic bag. So you fill it up and then you fold it like that. And then you tie off the top. For long hikes, it is best to tie the water-holding plastic bags so that the openings are higher than the water levels inside. To transport this type of expedient water bag in a vehicle, tie a rope around the fabric outer bag near its opening so that the rope also encircles and holds the plastic liner bags just below their tied shut openings. The other end of this rope should then be tied to some support to keep the openings higher than the water level. To use 2 fabric bags or pillowcases to carry a heavy load of water contained in larger plastic liner bags. Connect the 2 fabric bags as shown in figure 8.1. A small pebble, a lump of earth, or a similar object should be tied inside the opening of each bag before the 2 are tied together to hold them securely. The bag that is to be carried in front should have the pebble tied about 4 inches further down from the edge of its opening than the pebble tied in the bag to be carried in back. This keeps the pebbles from being pressed against the carrier's shoulder by a heavy load. A pair of trousers with both legs tied shut at the bottoms can be used to carry a balanced load if pillowcases or other fabric bags are not at hand. Such a balanced load can be slung over the shoulder with the body erect and less strained than if the same weight were carried in a single bag-like pack on the back. However, trouser legs are quite narrow and do not provide room to carry more than a few gallons. To prevent water from slowly leaking through the tied shut opening of plastic bags, the water levels inside should be kept below the openings. Storing water. When storing expedient water bags in a shelter, the water levels inside should be kept below the openings. Not many expedient shelters would be large enough to store an adequate volume of water for an occupancy lasting 2 or more weeks. Plastic-lined storage pits dug in the earth close to the shelter are dependable for storing large volumes of water using cheap, compact materials. Figure 8.3 shows a cylindrical water storage pit dug so as to have a diameter about 2 inches smaller than the inflated. Figure 8.3. Vertical section of cylindrical water storage pit lined with two 30-gallon waterproof plastic bags. This pit held about 20 gallons. It shows the pit roofed with a half-inch plywood or sticks covered with cloth or plastic. It shows the width is 18 inches and something about wire hoop. I guess that's on the top. On the inside, it shows it's 16 inches in diameter, cylindrical hole, and is 24 inches deep. And it shows where the water is. The wire hoop taped into folded over edge of 30-gallon polyethylene trash bag, 18 inches in diameter if fully expanded. Double bags are better. On the top is the waterproof buried roof of polyethylene. And then it shows earth is 15 inches deep. Page 74. Diameter of the two 30-gallon polyethylene trash bags lining it. One bag inside the other. Before a plastic bag is placed in such a pit, the ends of roots should be cut off, flush to the wall, with a sharp knife, and sharp rocks should be carefully removed. The best way to keep the upper edges of the pit lining bags from slipping into the pit is shown in figure 8.3. Make a circular wire hoop the size of the opening of the bag and tape it inside the top. In firm ground, the upper edges of double bags have been satisfactorily held in place simply by sticking 6 large nails through the turned under edges of the bags and into the firm earth. Figure 8.3 shows how to roof and cover a water storage pit so as to protect the water. The buried roof of waterproof material prevents any contamination of the stored water by downward percolating rainwater, which could contain bacteria or small amounts of radioactive substances from fallout. The thick earth cover over the flexible roofing gives excellent blast protection. Due to the earth arching that develops under blast pressure in a large Defense Nuclear Agency blast test, a filled water storage pit of the size illustrated was undamaged by blast effects at an overpressure range, which could demolish the strongest above ground buildings. 53 psi. A simpler way to store water is illustrated in figure 8.4. If the soil is so unstable that an unshored water storage pit with vertical sides cannot be dug, the opening of the bag or of one bag placed inside another can simply be tied shut so as to minimize leakage. See figure 8.4. Fill the bag with water, tie it, and place it in the pit. Then bury it with earth to Then bury it with earth to the level of the water inside. A disadvantage of this method is leakage through the tied shut openings due to pressure of loose earth on the bag. To lessen leakage, leave an airspace between the filled bag and a roofing of board or sticks, so that the weight of the earth piled on top of the roofing will not squeeze the bag. This storage method has another disadvantage. After the earth covering and the roof are removed, it is difficult to bail out the water for use, because as water is bailed out, the loose surrounding earth moves inward and squeezes the bag above the lowered water level. Large volumes of water can be stored in plastic-lined rectangular pits. In order to roof them with widely available materials, such as ordinary 3/4 inch plywood or small poles, the pits should be dug no wider than 3 feet. Figure 8.5 pictures such a pit 8 feet long, 27 inches wide, and 30 inches deep. It was lined with a 10-foot wide sheet of 4 mil polyethylene. The edges of this plastic sheet were held in place by placing them in shallow trenches dug near the sides of the pit and covering them with earth. That's the end of the page right there. Here's figure 8.4. These 2 30-gallon polyethylene trash bags, one inside the other, held 16 gallons of water. They were undamaged by 50 psi blast effects while buried in dry, very light soil. The plywood roof and the earth placed over the water bag were removed before this picture was taken. Like I said, it's really hard to see anything because it's in black and white. Figure 8.5 shows the post-blast view of plastic-lined water storage pit undamaged at 6.7 psi overpressure range. This pit held about 200 gallons. And I'm going to end it right there.